Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar, which is a really exciting webinar. We've got a Pharisees film screening tonight. So a little bit of housekeeping first before we get started. So my name's Grace, and I'm the Marine Advocacy Officer with the Irish Wildlife Trust. So I work on all things to do with the marine. The Irish Wildlife Trust is a charitable organisation, and our main role is to educate about the natural environment and biodiversity, and also to advocate for nature. So we do that at a local level, a national level, and also at an EU level. We're a non-governmental organisation. We've been going since the 70s, and we are a membership-based organisation as well. So if you want to become a member of the Irish Wildlife Trust, you can do so by going to our website, which is www.iwt.ie, and you can become a member there. And whenever you're a member, you receive our quarterly print magazine, which is lovely. There's lots of exclusive articles in it, beautiful photography, different competitions and things like that. And becoming a member, you also help to enable us to keep doing our work and hold events like this, and making sure that these events are still free so that they're accessible to everybody. So our webinar tonight is going to be recorded. So if you know anybody that isn't able to make it, or if you want to re-watch the webinar, you'll be able to do so, because it will be uploaded onto the Irish Wildlife Trust YouTube in the next couple of days. So you can keep a wee eye out for that. So tonight we were supposed to have Dr. Easkey Britton with us tonight, but unfortunately she wasn't able to make it at the last moment. But we'll keep you up to date with any sort of future work with her. But tonight we still have our film screening. So we've got Jack from Pharisees here, and he's going to give us a presentation on everything that Pharisees has been up to recently. And then we're going to get a chance to see the brilliant Pharisees, the Atlantic Northwest film. And then after that, we're lucky enough to have a few of the participants from the film. So we've got Peter, who is an angler with us. We've got Oriel from Sea Trails, which is an ecotourism operation. And then we've got Ethan, who is a scuba dive instructor. So we've got a big, broad range of stakeholders here, and we're going to chat with them and get their opinions. And if anyone has any questions, we've got the Q&A box. You can talk away in the chat box, but if you actually have any questions, if you can put them into the Q&A box, and I'll be able to monitor that. And then there'll be time for all the participants to answer any questions at the end. So that's everything from me. So I'll pass over to Jack now to give us a wee update about Pharisees.
Thank you so much, Grace. I am just going to welcome everybody, and it's great to have everyone here at this brilliant screening tonight. So I'm just going to share my screen here, and hopefully everyone can see this, a full screen.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, okay, great. Well, look, I'm gonna set a timer here now, so there's not going to be any waffling, I promise. So this is going to be basically a short update on everything Pharisees has been up to, and hopefully then it might answer some questions people have regarding marine protected areas in Ireland, and it might make you think of new questions that you might want to come up with for afterwards, especially after we've seen the film. So first of all, a big thanks to Grace and the Irish Wildlife Trust for putting this event on. It's wonderful, and unfortunately Easkey was called away at the last minute, but we're really excited to do something again in the future. So Pharisees, what is Pharisees all about? So our goal in Pharisees is to build a movement of ocean stewardship. And what does that mean? Well, ocean stewardship is when citizens and when people living their lives feel that we have an obligation, a duty, to look after the ocean, because it has looked after us for so long. And this amazing piece of sand art was done on a beach in County Waterford on the Copper Coast to mark the launch of one of our scientific report we released last year that I'll get into in more detail in a few slides. And Pharisees itself is not an NGO. Pharisees is a coalition of Ireland's largest environmental NGOs, so the environmental charities. And our mission is to see 30% of the ocean around Ireland to be protected by 2030. And within that 30%, at least 10% must be fully protected. So they are areas with no extractive human activities within them. And they are actually the areas that pay back the most to the communities in those areas, increase biodiversity the most, and actually the most affordable to manage and the cheapest to manage, because the more things you allow in a protected area, well, then the more management and monitoring you need, and then it gets more expensive. So it's really interesting about striking that balance to ensure we have these really protected areas within our marine protected area network. As I mentioned, we are a coalition. These are our various partners. We have 7 NGO partners around Ireland, and 4 main funders who fund this work and ocean conservation work around the world more broadly. So when Fair Seas began in 2022 as an idea that Ireland really needed to step up its game when it comes to protecting the ocean. In 2022, the coverage of protected areas in Ireland's territorial waters was about 2.1%. And if you look at this map here, you see we have the island of Ireland, and then there's this kind of thin black outline out to sea. That is Ireland's exclusive economic zone, or what's sometimes referred to as our maritime territory. That area is like about 10 times the size of the island of Ireland. So when you consider Ireland's marine territory, Ireland is what you'd call a lion, a large island ocean nation. And we would be one of the largest countries in Europe if our ocean territory was considered. And I mean, I think it reflects Irish society that has survived for so long from the sea and seafood, and even the important role seaweed has played in fertilizing fields in so many parts of Ireland for so long. But like I said, it's given us quite a lot, and we, until 2022, and the Irish government have done very little to give back. And I say the government because there are communities across Ireland doing so much to clean beaches, to monitor their local biodiversity, to do shore surveys. There is a lot happening, but at government level, there was no traction to protect the ocean. So in contrast, I say we were in a bad situation. This is where we were in 2022. And you might have seen in the news, there was announcements of some new protected areas at sea in Ireland. However, for the majority of those areas, there were lines drawn on a map. There was no proper stakeholder engagement. There is no sign of monitoring or funding or management for the majority of the areas. So at this stage, any new designations we get are what you call paper parks. So they're only protected on paper. And the small network that I'm talking about here, this is designated through European law. So they are special areas of conservation and special protection areas. And you might be familiar with those. They're all over Ireland. And our coastal ones, though, unfortunately, were not being managed. And we are calling for new Irish legislation so we can designate protected areas at a national level. And if we get this new legislation, what it means is now Fair Seas, as our team and our coalition, are working very hard to ensure this new legislation is very strong and that an area cannot be designated without also allocating the funding, the management, and the monitoring to actually go along with it. And so what would that look like? First of all, we need the legislation, and I'll get more into that a little bit later. But what would properly protected seas look like in Ireland? So have a look at this map here, and I'm going to change slide and have a look at it now. So you can see the kind of pale brown areas, the small boxes, that's like the 2.1% network. And the kind of shaded larger boxes, that's the network we're recommending. So this is what at least 30% of Ireland's waters protected would look like. And this map actually depicts 36% because after our analysis, which I'll get into in a second, we determined that was a good baseline for Ireland to hit by 2030 to ensure proper protection of some of our most sensitive sites. So in 2022, we released a report called Revitalizing Our Seas. And Revitalizing Our Seas, it looked at all sorts of biodiversity data from Irish waters. And basically what we did was we looked at 5 main groupings. So we looked at seabird data, we looked at commercially exploited and fished species, we looked at benthic habitats, so that's your kelp forests, your marl beds, your mud, the seagrass, all the different bottom types. We looked at sharks and skates and rays and chimeras, so the cartilaginous kind of those fishes. And we also looked at the whales and dolphins. And so we took all of the available data for Irish waters regarding those 5 categories across many, many different species. And what we did is we did analysis to find biodiversity hotspots, essentially. So high abundance and high frequency. So where do you have high sightings of animals, and then where do you have a lot of those animals? And so what we did is we had all those individual ones, and what we did is we layered them all together. And when you layered them together, it started to show hotspots where things were coexisting and real hives for biodiversity in Irish waters. If you have a smartphone, you can scan that QR code that's on your screen, and it'll bring the PDF of the report up on your phone. And if that doesn't work for you for whatever reason, if you just Google Revitalizing Our Seas, Fair Seas on Google, you'll find it, or it's on the homepage of our website, fairseas.ie. And this is a really nicely laid out report. Some scientific reports are very daunting, but this one you can actually go through it quite easily. And I'm really delighted to say that only last week, we won an award through our designer who designed this, Brian Byrne from Lands Design in Wexford. He won an award. He won the category of Designing for Good at the Institute of Irish Designer Awards that were on last week. So that's a national body, and it's their annual award ceremony. And his work with Fair Seas was recognized and won first place in their category for Designing for Good, which is amazing, you know. And it's really nice to see that of a scientific report, that it is actually accessible and it's not too dense. So in this report, when I said that we layered all that information on top of each other, we had to then try to see, okay, how would you break that up into a network of marine protected areas? A network is the key word. Small, isolated marine protected areas that might say they're protecting a feature, which is the way that, say, a special protection area works now. So if you have a special protection area on the coast that is designated for protecting seabirds, which SPAs are, you might have a small SPA surrounding a breeding site, but that gives no consideration to the foraging ranges of those birds, other sorts of potential developments or human activity in the surrounding waters that would be severely affecting that seabird colony. So a joined up marine protected area network allows for larger marine protected areas, and it allows us to think, okay, if we have a species that's in danger in our waters, for example, the puffin, like puffins are declining, they're threatened, and they're on the amber list, the Birdwatch Ireland amber list, which means puffins are on the road towards extinction. We're one of our most iconic species in Ireland. We should be doing everything as a government, as a nation. They should be putting so many resources into improving the breeding status of these birds. And the only places where seabirds seem to be improving is where an NGO like Birdwatch Ireland has stepped in, like on Rockabill Island, to actually manage intensively those colonies to ensure the birds are surviving. So I'd flick through this. When we layered all the data on top of each other, we came up with 16 areas of interest. So areas we think would make good marine protected areas. There are 8 large coastal sites, and there are 8 large offshore sites. And when you flick through the report, one thing I would say is if you do see a gap where we haven't said this should be a marine protected area, obviously every part of our coast is so important, and we need to have good management in 100% of Ireland's waters, not just 30%. But it just came down to the fact of the analysis and how clear the data we had was, but also some areas are already within other SACs or SPAs, and we therefore haven't put them in the new network, hoping that the new management style would be applicable to other areas. So just to explain that. And so, like I said, here's an example of some of the other maps you might see in the report, where you have like herring spawning grounds, for example, would be one layer. And then here, these are different bottom types. So you have corals, sponges, sea pens. So that's another really important conservation topic. And then here, for example, you have bottlenose dolphin densities. And so basically we take maps like this and basically layer them on top of each other, and then see where the highest densities of these things coexist. So that's basically the thinking behind the research. And so it brings me here to an interesting place, to what probably a lot of people in this Zoom who are interested in the ocean represent. And for me, this photo represents our opportunity to become the bridge between the land and the sea. As it happens, this is my local surf spot in South Kerry. That's not me, unfortunately. But, you know, I think anyone interested in ocean conservation, or people who like angling, swimming, walking, diving, anything like that, we are ambassadors of the ocean, and the ocean can give us so much for our mental health, for our physical health. You know, I think I'm just speaking even personally, it gives me so much. It's such a place of solace and joy for me. And then when I come back on the land, to know that marine biodiversity in Ireland is really in decline quite severely, that I feel that now I can use my voice to speak to my local representatives, to speak to my communities, and to encourage us all to do more to protect the ocean. So I think everyone in this room probably can relate to that if you're on this webinar and if it's something of interest to you. And the main reason we need to use our voice is because these incredible animals, so basking sharks that gather potentially for ritualistic breeding purposes in Irish waters and to feed, and amazing, amazing benthic habitats of these anemones. This photo is taken by Ethan, who we'll be chatting to later on. Like, look at the color of what lies beneath the waves in Ireland, if we can just get out and see it. And again, like I mentioned, the puffin, the most iconic species. And I feel this photo is so solemn. This solitary puffin on sunset on the Skellig really stands out as the puffins are looking at their future. And I think we have an opportunity now to do all we can to help them. So I think that's it. We are connected to the ocean, and now it's time to use that passion and what it gives us to help do some good. And why exactly? So when I say we're the bridge between the sea and our communities are multifaceted. They're made up of so many parts. And we're going to show Fair Seas, the Atlantic Northwest today, about the amazing coastal communities of Donegal and Sligo. And these are actually a few photos from our earlier film, Fair Seas, the Kingdom of Kerry, which is also on YouTube, with some of the amazing people we met along the way. Ecotourism operators, fishermen, anglers, scuba divers, a whole host of amazing community members. And I feel these are the people we're talking to, as well as our representatives, when I say we should be representing the sea and spreading the word about ocean conservation. And when we come into our communities, an amazing thing to understand is we're not coming in cold. And I don't speak for every community in Ireland. I haven't visited, and I know there's lots of different opinions out there on how things should be done in the ocean. But in our very early research, we found out that 83% of people in Ireland say they have a personal connection to the sea. So that's a good start. That is a very good starting point. And as well as that 75% of people understood the role of healthy seas in protecting and reducing climate change. So if we have protected seas, they can really help us, because since the 1970s, 90% of the excess heat generated by human beings and 30% of the CO2 has gone into the ocean. And we're seeing more frequent kind of unpredictable weather events in Ireland. We're seeing flash flooding. We're seeing all sorts of unusual, unprecedented weather events that are being brought on by warming waters, a warming climate. But if you think about it, like I said, the ocean has absorbed 90% of that heat since the 70s. It has absorbed at least 30% of the CO2, and the ocean is the biggest carbon sink on the planet if it is in a healthy condition. That means that the ocean has reined in the damaging effects of climate change, and it has held onto that and actually protected us. It has been the biggest buffer in protecting us from the adverse effects of climate change. So I just feel, when I think about that we have a huge opportunity to, it is now struggling and it's starting to push the boundaries, and we're starting to see it's shaking a bit. But at this tipping point, now it is vital that we push it back to protect the seas, create healthy ecosystems that can sequester and store carbon, to increase wildlife populations that can do the same thing. Because if we can do that, then the ocean can continue to be there for us and to help us. Not to mention it producing 50% at least of the oxygen we're all breathing right now. So I think that's just an amazing thing to keep in mind, how it has already protected us and it will protect us, but we really need to focus on protecting it as well to make sure that can keep happening. And then the last step, which is wonderful to see, we did this research at the start of the Fair Seas campaign, that 4 in 5 people would support more legal protection of our seas, which is a really key point. And it's interesting to see how people are aware of that. And like I said, this research we conducted early on in 2022, and we did some recent, we had an ocean literacy survey over the summer. And an incredible fact that came out of that was that Irish people identified, so 76% of Irish people, so that's 3/4 of people in Ireland, identified the greatest threat to the ocean in Ireland was a lack of political will. That was ranked by 3/4 of people surveyed in Ireland. And we surveyed, this was a sample of over 1,000 people. The exact number is there, 1,293 people. So that's it. In statistically speaking, it's a good sample. 3/4 of those identified the lack of political will was the biggest threat to the ocean in Ireland, above overfishing, above climate change, above plastic pollution. And that is the key thing. And like I mentioned at the very start of this, that 2.1% of a badly protected area network that was, is in Ireland currently, it doesn't work. And that is because there is not the political will to make it happen. I'm not saying maybe the political will doesn't exist, but if it is there, it is not being activated. And this is urgent. 2030 is fast approaching. And if we are to have proper marine protected areas and the processes to be good with proper stakeholder engagement and the use of the best scientific information, well, then we need to begin today. This is not a process that can be rushed. So a few more small points. We're nearly there now, so I won't take too much more of your time. There's a new blog on our website on the benefits of marine protected areas for fishing and coastal communities. This focuses a lot probably more on the fishing side of it, but it's very fascinating. And there's links to examples and case studies of all of the points that are made in the blog. So marine protected areas have been studied, especially the highly protected areas. And it's been found that in some areas, the amount of fish, crabs, lobsters in the area has increased by 760%. That is, like, I can't even imagine what that's like. But we had Professor Mark Costello with us in the Dáil recently in an AV room session, which I'll touch on in a minute. And he is a world-leading professor on marine protected areas and marine conservation. And he said in New Zealand, he was working there for a long time, and they kind of pioneered marine reserves, which are like highly protected kind of ocean national parks. He said you wouldn't believe it. He said he was snorkeling one day, and he said in these areas, they've been protected from the 70s. The fish are no longer afraid of people. So he said when you're snorkeling, the fish don't get out of the way. And he said he was snorkeling one time, and there was a child snorkeling, not so far from him, and a fish the size of this 5 or 6 year old child came up, had a look at this human, and just kept swimming past. And I mean, for that child alone must have been a life-changing experience. And this is the reality. This is happening in other parts of the world. This is what needs to happen in Ireland. And I would just absolutely love to see an ocean where you could go out and witness that. And, there are amazing things you can see in Irish waters all the time. But again, we have to remember what we're looking at today, and just protecting what we have today is a very small amount of what should be there. So we need to allow them to expand while we protect them. So we need restoration and protection working hand in hand. And I'll touch on that again in a minute. So again, this is on fairseas.ie. Just click on the news section, and it's within the articles there. You'll see this article. And sorry, this is what I was touching on. This is a photo by Sir Alex Mustard, a very famous, probably the most famous underwater photographers. And this was taken off the south coast of England. And this is a cod, a beautiful, beautiful cod in a kelp forest. Ireland has so many stretches, like tens of thousands of kilometers of native, ancient kelp forest ecosystems around our coast. But I've never seen a cod like this swimming in one. And okay, maybe that was down to it just, he was looking at me and I couldn't see him. But this just shows me what we could have. Cod use kelp forests, like many of our other commercial species, as spawning grounds, or they use them as nursery grounds. So the young juvenile fish will spend a lot of time in them. And you could say the same for seagrass meadows. So it's very important that we protect these areas, and in areas where they have been damaged, well, then to restore those areas to what they should be, to allow the ecosystem to, I suppose, come back online into a fully functioning state. And just on marine protected areas, like I said, we're nearly done. So a few interesting points to touch on. Earlier this year, Fair Seas published a new report called Sustainably Financing Ireland's Marine Protected Areas. I know it just rolls off the tongue, but it's this is a very important report, and it's the first of its kind in Europe that looked at how do you finance and pay for a marine protected area network. Again, it's available on the homepage of our website. And when it says here, we estimate that 55 million needs to be spent on marine protected areas between now and 2030. So number one, what do we mean by that? So we mean the establishment of the network, but also as it gets established, that the monitoring gets rolled out. So this is bringing us from now to 2030, starting to manage and to allocate and designate these areas. That includes the stakeholder engagement and the surveys, all sorts of things like that. So it's not the longest report in the world, but it is quite detailed. For anyone who is more interested, have a look at it on our website. what I will say is 55 million. Like, what is 55 million? Like, I don't have 55 million in the bank. If for me, that sounds like a lot of money. But just put it in terms of government funding and budgets. In 2023 alone, the Irish government gave horse and greyhound racing 91 million euros in 2023 alone. So 55 million between now and 2030 is, without any way understating it, a drop in the ocean. It is, and that's our middle. We could go less, you could go more, but we're saying that's the kind of sweet spot that we're recommending at the moment. Obviously, we'd always hope it would be more than that, but yeah, that's just that's what we think at this stage. And I mentioned earlier on about the legislation, so just in case I wasn't clear, when Fair Seas began, there was no legislation, so there was no way to create a national marine protected area under Irish law. There is the possibility to create a special area of conservation or a special protection area under the EU Birds and Habitats Directive. And so the reason that is not up to standard is because a special area of conservation, so SAC, or a special protection area, SPA, and the SPAs are just for birds, just to get that straight. They are just for birds, and the SACs are for everything else. The reason they are not so good, and I mentioned before about just protecting, like, say, a seabird colony. Like, if you have puffins on this rock, okay, protect the rock, but what are you actually doing by protecting that? This works by, there's a list. So the Birds and Habitats Directive, the European Union have a list of species, and if that species is there, well, then you can create one of these areas to protect them, but you can't create it to protect the food that they eat, or you can't protect it. You can't create it maybe to protect the habitat that they need. It's just not as robust as it could be. So we're asking for Irish legislation, new national marine protected areas legislation that will allow us to build a holistic network of protected areas that says, when you're going to protect a puffin, well then, okay, puffins have to eat, they have to feed their chicks during the nesting season. So we need to protect sand eels and we need to protect sprat. So if you understand what I mean there, I hope that's more clear. That's why we need this new legislation. And in that legislation, there's other things that we want that have to be done before a protected area can be established. One of those is obviously outlining the authority responsible for the designation, like who's going to be in charge of marine protected areas in Ireland. That's something that hasn't been laid out yet. What we need to do is just a few of these points is have mandatory and very early on stakeholder engagement as a core part of the process. And we're asking for stakeholder engagement to become a legal a part of the legislation, so the government are legally bound to carry out that process in an area. Because for a marine protected area to work, you need good management and monitoring and funding, of course, but you need a community who believe in it. You need a community who are being supported to implement it until the point that they can really see the benefits themselves. Because like that, marine protected areas can have very fast recovery rates. It all depends on the area. We've heard of, we have a video on our YouTube with Irla Kennellan, who is a marine biologist and shellfish researcher based in Galway. In Bertabui Bay, there was a scallop and oyster population that was completely almost fished out, except for a small restocking site in the inner bay. With the fishermen and themselves, they came up with a plan and they closed the bay to fishing. Within 3 years, the entire population had recovered. And all they had to do was stand back and let it do it. And he says that himself. It's one of my favorite quotes. He said, it's not rocket science. We just have to let them do what they'll do naturally. And just, we just have to stop threatening them and kind of hammering them while they're just trying we're over exploiting. So as long as we don't do that, we can allow them to recover, which is amazing. And so that's another key point that we're saying in this legislation, that we need to see restoration as a key part of this, that there's a definition for restoration within it. So what I'd say is these 10 key asks, if you are on Fair Seas within the articles on our news page on our website, we would really recommend that if you could please just send an email to your local representative, link them the blog on our website where we mentioned these 10 key asks, and say, I just want to let you make you aware of this legislation, that it's forthcoming. I'm going to get to the timelines on the legislation now in a minute, but just to share this 10 key asks with them, to be like, this is for me as your constituent. These must be within the legislation. Would you please represent these? And it's something very simple that we can all do, and it's really, really effective. So like I mentioned, on the legislation front, because this is a legislative issue, we do a lot of work trying to inform our government and our elected representatives about marine protected areas. So when it comes to building a movement of ocean stewardship, obviously we're having nights like this, we hold events, we travel around the country, we try to produce a lot of informative information and obviously these films. But behind the scenes, a lot of our work is having meetings in the Dáil, traveling to the various political parties' Ardeshina, the party conferences. And so at the end of October there, we had a session in the Dáil Éireann AV room, which is like a lecture theatre. And we had an amazing spread of representation from nearly all of the main political parties and groupings within the Dáil. And you can see here on the bottom corner, Grace and a few of our other colleagues at the Sinn Féin Ardesh, which was last week. And it's just very important because obviously our political representatives, they have a lot of people coming to them. So we try to put on these sessions to really allow them to ask questions and to understand the issue. So when it comes up, they're well informed. And when legislation does come before the Dáil, that they're informed. And so the reason we had this recent AV session was because we were told that by the Minister Malcolm Noonan, that at our conference in June, he said that he expected the legislation to be published in July 2023. We are now in November and we still have no sign or clear deadline for the legislation. We do have in writing, he said it would come before Christmas. However, now we believe that it's looking more like 2024, sometime in the first few months of 2024. So there are delays happening here, and we have really no time to delay on this. We need to see the next draft and the full draft of Ireland's Marine Protected Area Law, because it still has to go before the Dáil for debate and for scrutiny before committee. So we need to ensure this is released. We have a petition ongoing at the moment, and you'll see in one of our photos here, this is Minister Malcolm Noonan, and in the middle, holding up the placard, is our campaign manager, Aoife O'Mahony, and then you have Una Duggan from Birdwatch Ireland. And we have a petition that's live, and it's still live, but at the time of our AV room meeting, we had 11,758 signatures from people from Ireland who have signed this petition calling on the bill to be released ASAP. And it was really powerful to get to bring everyone who signed that essentially to the Dáil with us and hand it to the minister in charge. And so if you would like to sign this petition, I'm sure you've all done it already. I'm not trying to catch anyone out here. But also I can't see your videos. So if you have a smartphone, you can hold it up and scan the QR code. There's also a link you could type into Google there. And we have just crossed 34,000 signatures on this petition. And the petition launched in like early October, I think it was around the 25th of September. So that's a super short time. And we've had such a high volume of signatures. Those signatures are also from around the world. So I think it's about 13,000 Irish are signatures from Ireland. And the others are made up of supporters of this issue from other parts of the world. So it's just great to see the international community, as much as people in Ireland, calling for us, our Atlantic island, to be doing more to protect the ocean. And so just another small point is the Greater Skellig Coast. If you haven't heard about it, it's Ireland's first hope spot. And hope spots are areas designated by Mission Blue as areas that are critically important as they contribute to global biodiversity. Some other hope spots are around the Great Barrier Reef and in parts of Antarctica. So this is amazing to see Ireland recognised on the map as an area globally that contributes to ocean biodiversity. And like I said, this is one of the only ones in the Northeast Atlantic, and I'm sure it is not the last one for Ireland. So I had this is just, I wanted to give kudos to Sylvia Earle, who you all might know, who was the founder of Mission Blue, who runs the Hope Spot project. And it's just wonderful to see someone of her stature, one of the most famous marine biologist on earth, now looking at Ireland. And there's a really, really nice video. I won't play it here this evening because I will get onto our next film, but it's a really nice video of her introduction to the Greater Skellig Coast Hope Spot of Ireland on YouTube. So definitely have a look at that. And I just say, yeah, gur maith agah galéir, tam cósás agus cómhuiach a bheith anseo live galéir nocht, and na sconán má tá aine anseo le gailge, tá astrú chun déanta a going na sconán go gailge, ach tá just fannacht piece editing agus gohu na sconán conid churamach trí legan gailge. So I'm just saying there for anyone that anyone with who's interested in Irish or speaks Irish, or would just like to hear these films in Irish, we are working on how we can get the films translated. We have the scripts translated into Irish, so it's all a matter of just getting those edited now and getting them ready. So that is something that is coming, and we're really excited to share that with you all. So thank you all so much for listening. And I think, Grace, if it's okay, without further ado, we'll just go straight to the film. Thank you all so much for tuning into that. And I was just saving one special thank you on that video to this moment, which is, you may realize during the Q&A that the wonderful narration was done by Grace Carr of the Irish Wildlife Trust. And I think I'm just so excited for this Q&A because like how well articulated and how well everyone communicates you know, their points in that film. So I'm just really looking forward to hearing from Peter and Ethan and Oriel, and hand it over to you, Grace.
Thanks, Jack. Yes, and thanks to Swimming Head Production as well, because I think you can all agree that film is brilliant. It shows the Wild Atlantic way just beautifully, and like Jack said, everyone articulated their points so brilliantly. So we have a few questions here. I'll go straight to Peter. So Peter, you're an angler and you've fished all over the world. So do you think that people's views and mindsets have changed on ocean conservation over the years? And do you notice a difference between Irish people's point of view compared to, you know, people that you've met and fished with in other places?
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly when I started fishing in Donegal more than 40 years ago, and fishing a bit before that as well, the ignorance about was unbelievable looking back. Nowadays, we're so much more attuned to it with regard to fishing competitions. Back then, more than 40 years ago, they had heaviest bag. They just killed everything they caught. You know, looking back, it was terrible. There's no question it was. Nowadays, that's almost unheard of. There's catch limits, there's size limits, there's mostly catch and release in competitions. But also, you know, in Ireland, how we treated the ocean back then, it was often used as a dump. You know, if you spare rubbish, it just went over the side of the boat. It was, you know, the ignorance was unbelievable. And that wasn't every angler did that, but some did. But nowadays, charter boat skipper wouldn't permit anything going over the side. It all goes back to land, you know, in terms of rubbish. In terms of the rest of the world, yes, we're ahead in some and behind others. But we're not behind in the passion that we have for our oceans, and the quality of our seas is extremely high. But take Florida Keys there, they police it well. If your boat damages the seagrass, you're charged hundreds of dollars per meter of damage. They have patrols that'll spot your fishing catch. This is just for ordinary anglers, not talking about commercial. And they'll have a look at the species, measure your fish. So they really are well ahead of us in terms of that part of the world. Alas, other parts of the world are still treating the sea and the product from the sea very badly. But overall, as the years have gone by, yes, we're making slow and steady steps. And I think this is the smelling salts time. You know, everybody is starting to wake up. And I think there will be a joined up thinking eventually between countries, and this will spread not just Ireland, but all our neighbours, certainly in the North Atlantic. So we're going forward, and but we need to keep the pressure on. We need to keep doing that. But seismic change, absolutely. Yeah.
Brilliant, thanks, Peter. It's good to know, you know, that you've seen changes, that especially with skippers and what you were saying there about how they used to just throw stuff overboard, and now, you know, it's very.
Oh, it really is very much. You would be. You know, it really is taboo now, you know, and it's the same with, I specialize in the shark. Early days, sharks were killed. Nowadays, I don't know any angler kills sharks now, truthfully. It's so frowned upon. And certainly you wouldn't see any pictures of sharks dead, all catch and release, all tagged. It produces a lot of information that we can base scientific research on, because you're going to need point some statistics, catch rates, where they're being caught, so on and so on. So the anglers are feeding this all back into the system now. So the sport has changed dramatically. So we're now being very productive and providing good, sound-based intelligence that people can act upon. With tagging, I do satellite tags as well as the ordinary tags and all sorts of things, and it produces a lot of good evidence that we can now point to, rather than just guesswork. Say, we think this is happening, or we can now say we know this is happening, and with the statistics to back it up. So
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. It's vital for scientific research. So that's great. So speaking about sharks there as well, so I'll ask Ethan, you're a scuba dive instructor. So I think for a lot of people, it's kind of a lot of problems are kind of, if they're out of sight, then they're out of mind. But you're a diver, so you see what's going on underneath the water on a regular basis. So have you noticed a change in the species and habitats underwater? And what changes do you think are the most important for people to know about?
Absolutely. And I suppose it's one of the loveliest privileges, diving, being able to experience marine life, witnessing it firsthand, being under the sea with being surrounded by it. But then to be able to recognize kind of the changes that are happening over time as well. Like they can be negative, but they can also be quite positive. Much of my marine conservation, my dive career was based in the Philippines, so in the tropics. And then we were having the opportunity to really dive and monitor the same sites daily over years. And that's when you really get to see, I suppose, how these local pressures, such as overfishing, pollution, marine tourism was a huge one. And just, of course, our global pressures like climate change, ocean acidification, and how these all have an impact on these vital ecosystems. And you can really see how in certain areas have completely destroyed certain reefs or certain key habitat kind of areas. But then we've also had the opportunity to witness then how resilient these reefs or certain habitats can be if they've been given the time, the space, the protection needed. And the protection has been well managed. And it's surprisingly, I think Jack mentioned it earlier, just how quick they can and will recover if given that space and time, you know. And then since coming back to Ireland, like I've just been hugely impressed by like just the amazing diversity of our local marine life. Like we have these accessible, expansive blue carbon ecosystems surrounding our whole coastline. And I don't think I appreciate it as much as I have since diving them. So definitely that connection, being underwater, seeing it firsthand, being able to see these kelp forests or seagrass beds, the bioreefs, and then you're just seeing how they're continuously having to deal with certain pressures. And if we keep then adding to these pressures, then we'll continue to see the stress, the degradation, the destruction of key habitats. And as Peter mentioned, kind of like the laws around like anchoring in seagrass beds and so on, like these are, even to local pressures, are really, really important that we can manage that. Because then what will happen, we'll see with that destruction, we'll then see an increase in disease, invasive species, and then loss of biodiversity, and then loss of stock, of course, and livelihoods. So it's really important to look out for these changes, but not only to look out but to record it. And we can do that being under the surface. We can do that through videography, photography, and then together, then we can then provide evidence to find, I suppose, solutions of how to mitigate these stressors and work together to restore certain areas. So yeah, so it's all about building that valuable connection, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's why, you know, these films are so great as well, because you get to showcase some of the beautiful underwater footage and, you know, coastal community opinions as well. No, thanks, Ethan. So Oriel, you spoke a little bit about pollution in the film, and I see a few questions here from people wondering what they can do to help. So in your opinion, what do you think local people could do to help preserve our marine environment? Oh, you're just on mute there, Oriel.
Apologies. Thank you for having me, and I'm delighted to be part of this. And I think Fair Seas campaign is fantastic what you're doing. So fair play to you. Well done, Jack. It's a great presentation as well. And yeah, there's lots of ways that people can help improve Ireland's coastline, and all of us can be part of that, every single one of us. What I will say is, in terms of offshore movement of rubbish and plastic, an awful lot of it is coming from very far away. So we actually don't really have any control over that. The shocking stats that I looked up on the internet today, 5.25 trillion macro and micro pieces of plastic are currently in our ocean. And I would say actually that's probably less than what is actually there. And, you know, it's just horrendously shocking. So what I will say is that there's only so much we can do on our own patch or within our territorial waters. Because a lot of the marine waste that you see washed up, and I see this every time I'm out on the coast doing walking tours or just walking on the coast myself, I see rubbish that is, and I'm sorry to say, Peter, but an awful lot of the rubbish is from fishermen. It's from fisher vessels. It's netting. It's nylon, string or rope from boats. There's plastic containers, everything that you would definitely, it would have come from marine vessels out there. And whether it's old or new, there's everything of all ages and either intact or broken up. So we on the shore can't really do anything about that. So the fishermen absolutely have to try and mend their ways in that regard. And I think that, and I know it's a terrible thing to say, but I think our oceans for a very long time have been basically used as a gigantic toilet bowl. You know, we have used and abused our oceans for too long. So yes, and I agree with Jackie saying that action has to be, it's imminent now. It really has to happen now for protection of our future. So in ways that you can fix or try and clean up the coast, very easy. You can do your own 2-minute beach clean. Everyone can do this. You bring a bag down, a pair of gloves, and you pick what you see in 2 minutes or longer if you want. You pack it into a bag and you bring it back with you and you put it in a recycle bin. That's how easy it is. You put it in your general rubbish if it's something that can't be recycled. It's not hard to do that. Anyone can do it. Even children can do it. I'm part of the Heritage Schools programme, and I do education workshops in the marine environment. Bring them out and I tell the school in advance, listen, or ask them, is it okay I do beach clean as part of this? And yes, they're all fine with it, and some of them have already done it. So that's great that in Ireland that it is being done. But beach cleans can be all the gear and the equipment can be given by the An Taisce, who provide all the beach cleaning stuff like bags and picks and everything you need, and gloves even, I think, and bibs, a whole lot. So anyone, local area or group who wants to set up around the coast, if they haven't already done so, can do this and just beach clean for a couple of hours. And it's actually very therapeutic. It's really enjoyable. You get to meet interesting people out there who are like-minded, who care about the nature, and you do your little bit of the environment, so you feel great after it. And children and adults can do that very easily. So those beach cleans are going on annually, and Clean Coasts are doing a fantastic job there to try and get, you know, more people involved. But you can do it yourself. Like I say, you don't even need to be part of a group. You can actually go out and do it yourself. So yeah, I would say education in schools is vitally important. So those young people are learning about the environment, marine environment, how important it is and how vulnerable it is at the moment. So education is everything, and the Green Schools programme are doing a great job in terms of environment. So I think the marine area should be included in that. The local authorities, I would blame for an awful lot of rubbish on the coast. There aren't enough bins. I know it's a simple thing again. Why aren't there more bins? You know, in places like public areas during summers, the holiday periods, the bins are always stuffed. There's never enough bins, or they're just full and then they're left for animals to pick at, and then they're not emptied enough. So I see this everywhere. And I don't understand, you know, why is it like that in a first world country? So if there were more bins, I think that people would be a little bit better about leaving their rubbish in a bin, at least, and not, you know, in the dunes or on the beach. So local authorities definitely have a role to play there. But anyway, that's aside from, you know, the families or people on the ground. People can get involved in marram grass growth, so to protect the dunes and stop them from breaking down. And again, the ecosystem within the sand dunes will eventually die if the dunes don't have protection, and they need to be fixed by marram grass. So again, that's the thing that any local area or local development, a group or the county council and Clean Coast are supportive, and they do actually organise those marram grass plantings. So anyone can do that for their own area, and help the ecosystems there. And yeah, I suppose obviously, like I said, we can pick up, leave no trace, bring your rubbish home. And I suppose the last thing I would say is more from, I suppose, domestic side of things in agricultural. Ireland is largely agricultural, so around the coast not only do we have the marine activities, but we also have farming right on the edge of the coastline. So what's happening there, a lot of the outfall is from farms and from catchment, river catchments, is going into the sea. And there are toxins in the water, and the marine species are suffering as a result, and so are our rivers and intertidal areas. So I think that's a government job, but you know, more legislation and work needs to be done there to prevent the spoiled water going out and polluting the local coastal areas and marine estuaries and so on. Oh yeah, and there's also I didn't realize myself until recently that there are charities out there to protect the marine environment in I would say every country. Well, maybe not every country, but the ones that are aware. There's one called the Project Aware charity, which is You Dive Against Debris, adopt a dive site, which is a fantastic idea. And you go down, all the divers go down and pick up. Even you probably know about that, and you've probably been involved with them. And I think Eski most definitely probably has. So you know, that's a local thing, and help the area, and that also encourages more people to come and dive in those sites, because nobody wants to dive on a site that's no longer flamboyant with marine life and colourful. You know, if the coral reef is dying or whatever marine species are affected, they're not going to be popular dive sites anymore. So you know, I think restoration has to happen there for those types of sites as well. Leave them be for a certain length of time and let them regenerate. So I think I've covered, oh yeah, the other thing is social media. Everyone, finally, sorry, social media, everyone is on their phones nowadays. Social media is the quickest, fastest, biggest way to actually spread the word. So we can all spread the word on the petition, for example. You did that, and all the participants here, and whoever's, you know, interested in all of this can spread that out to their friends and family and try and get that those marine reserves protected, and in the legislation in the government, I mean. So social media is definitely a biggie for encouraging people to go out and beach cleans. I suppose educating people generally on what they can do every day to help their own coastal area. So I think I've spoken enough now. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, no, perfect. That was brilliant, really informative and good for people to find out about things that they don't know about. There was actually a comment there, someone talking about the use of detergents that state they cause harm to marine life, and we're all using them without a second thought. So yeah, like a lot of like things that you use to wash your clothes and stuff, it does state on the back, most of the big brands, that it does cause harm to marine life. So like another thing that people can do is make the switch to more environmentally friendly ones of them. You can go to like a local health food shop, sometimes they sell them there, or you can order them online. But again, it's so many people don't realize because it's not spoken about. So like you were saying, letting people know on social media as well is really powerful. So I'm conscious of the time because we are running over and there's a lot of questions come through, but I'll just do one more, and anybody feel free to answer this one. It's just about offshore wind farms and how they would affect marine protected areas. And is this something that is considered when choosing marine protected area sites?
Can I maybe jump in there, Grace, just quickly on that from the policy point of view? So just that's a very vital point at this time in Ireland, and I won't say conscious of time. So in the next month, the Fair Seas is going to release official policy position on offshore renewable energy. Spoiler alert, brief preview. Basically, in Ireland, there is no need for competition between marine protected areas and offshore renewable energy. We have an area 10 times the size of our island out to sea. That is more than enough space to have clean, renewable energy that supports livelihoods, generates income, generates clean energy that we need in the fight against climate change. But we also need to have the marine protected areas on the very important sites to ensure that biodiversity can recover, and that can also then do its job to sequester the extra carbon. So it's very, very important that we have the two of them working in unison. And actually, wonderfully, Wind Energy Ireland were the next people in the Dáil AV room after us when we were in there in October. Like directly, our sessions were back to back. So we got to meet Wind Energy Ireland on the way in, and we are in contact with them. They are all for marine protected areas. They are all for this process being done right. Because as well, if you think about it from a business point of view, from an offshore renewable wind company, for example, they're not going to do all this scoping and analysis and research and then find out it's going to be a marine protected area. They need to know that, we need to have the marine protected areas in place before the offshore renewable energy is developed, so that we can be sure that they won't be damaged by, say, that infrastructure if it is in an ecosystem where it would cause harm. So that's basically it. They don't need to be in competition. And that would be kind of a key point. And another point is just that you might hear that they increase biodiversity. There is a point to be made that a wind farm in the sea acts like an artificial reef. So shellfish grow down the side of it, fish might shoal in it. However, the other side of it is also a power station. It is a man-made structure and not the natural structure that's supposed to be there. So saying it's an artificial reef, okay, technically, yes, it's an artificial reef, but that's not the ecosystem of that area. And if it's damaging the ecosystem that's there, or if it's interfering with seabirds or whatever it is, whatever's on the bottom, well, then that's not a benefit. And I think that can be a strange argument that people think, oh, well, then that's fine then. But we have to be careful that we have to look and analyze what is already in that area, and that needs to be prioritized for protection, if that makes sense. And like that policy statement is coming out, so keep an eye on Fair Seas on our social media channels, and you can have a read of the full ins and outs of it all.
Perfect. Brilliant, Jack. Right, well, it's 10 to 9 now, so we've gone over a bit, but thank you so much for everyone for taking part. All your answers to the questions were brilliant. We didn't get through all the questions, so if anybody really wants their question answered, feel free to drop me or Jack a line. Just email Fair Seas or the Irish Wildlife Trust, and we will get back to you with the questions. Really sorry that we couldn't answer all of them this evening. But again, thank you for all our participants. These were brilliant. And thanks everybody for tuning in. And the video will be up on the Irish Wildlife Trust YouTube channel in the next couple of days. So feel free to share and tell your friends all about it. So good night, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Ethan. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Grace.